All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley, and here's your host, Alan Mosley.
Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. I am your host, Alan Mosley, and is this episode 4 or 5 or 15 or 50 or?
I lost count.
Yeah, we're going off air.
We're going.
Anyway,
it's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Keep rolling with it.
Keep rolling. That's
with it. Just keep rolling with it.
Yeah, I did want to say I saw that you had a little social media exchange recently over. You were talking about money, and you were talking about like cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin and stuff.
Oh yeah, see, I don't get that, man.
You don't get
like,
that?
Here's the thing about this whole Bitcoin thing, and and forgive me to take a couple seconds to go off about this, but man, look, if I can't hold my gold, I don't believe it's real. Okay, and it's one thing to see old Uncle Sam's greenbacks flapping in the wind and the value of them things going up and down all day long. Shoot, you go to the store to get a can of soup, it's $4. Okay, I remember when you go to soup and get a can of soup at the store, it was $1. Okay,
not but back in 1992.
No, back in like 2007. Okay, maybe it was sooner than that. But when you got a currency that exists only in a cyberspace sort of mindset, how is that real? I mean, and then, okay, so if a hacker can get into my phone, what stops a hacker from hacking the heck out of every Bitcoin on earth and stealing everybody's money? Because anything that's in the digital domain is available to be hacked. And I don't get blockchain. I'm hearing about, people are talking about blockchain now when they're talking about growing produce. And I'm like, okay, first of all, what the heck is a blockchain? Okay. And when I think about that, I think about my bicycle chain falling off. And I'm like, I don't get it. I just don't get it. You asked.
Oh, no, I know I did. He
asked.
I know. I didn't realize you were so upset.
I'm very passionate about this because, me and all the country boys out here, we're like, look, that ain't real.
Let me say this. I'm putting this announcement out there that I want to have a whole episode dedicated to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency.
And fake money.
But we're going to have to find a really good guest that we can have come on to really be the person that I can bounce questions off of so they can explain everything to Blake so that Blake doesn't think that a hacker's going to steal all of his net worth. Because it's like the movie, where they just and then it said, all right, I'm in, and they... I'm sorry.
Look, it's scary. It's scary. Whenever somebody comes up with something new that is so profoundly technical and extremely difficult to understand for the average person, people are scared of that. It
is new, and it's a cryptocurrency is an area that's still being fleshed out. Yeah. Absolutely. All I will say is, and I put myself in the same boat. I remember when Bitcoin was first a thing, and it was like $30 or $100 for a Bitcoin, and now Bitcoin is like $7,700, or I think it took a little bit of hit. It's $7,200 per one Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I wish I had bought some Bitcoin. And so
that's what they keep saying.
Yeah. Well, I think the conversation in the cryptocurrency world today is, how will something like Bitcoin evolve in the sense of, will it become something that is as flexible and convenient as money, as dollars and cents, or will it be doomed to just basically be an investment like a gold or silver? I mean, you theoretically can spend gold or silver as well, but of course, it was FDR that confiscated everyone's gold and silver, and then we got off the gold standard during Nixon's years.
Yeah.
So it's not practical for you to go to the gas station and then go to a restaurant and then to Walmart and run home spending gold, just in the same way it's not.
Or Bitcoin.
Yeah, or Bitcoin.
Because then it's just a credit card. What's the difference?
But like I said, that's an area that's still being fleshed out. I do own a little bit of Bitcoin. I wish I owned a lot of Bitcoin.
You do own some Bitcoin?
I do own some Bitcoin.
Are you sure?
Yes. It was there when I left this morning, and I feel fairly confident that it cannot be seized. The real conversation about it is, it's just simply it's an alternative. That's what it's all about. It's having an alternative from what the Federal Reserve will issue you, and even if you're somebody who believes that it's nothing more than an investment piece like a stock and it's not really a currency, and I don't believe that, and I think it'll flesh out in a different way. But even if you did believe that. It's the same thing as I heard recently, especially even in the libertarian community and in the Austro-economic community, is that you have all these doom and gloomers like Alan Mosley, who will tell you that,
that guy.
Yeah. who will tell you that, everything's a bubble and the market's going to crash and everyone's going to lose their shirts, so you've got to have hard assets and you need to be burying your gold in your yard because the world's going to crumble. I definitely believe that we are in for some serious times ahead. However, the point can also be made that if you're always so bearish, and if you always think that the decline is going to come any day now, so divest, get all of your capital, get out of the market, then you're losing lots of opportunity to be making money that you could be making. Because for people who back in, say, 2012 thought the crash was imminent, well, it's been some years and you lost chances to make some investments.
Yeah.
And for me, it's kind of the same thing as Bitcoin, is that when Bitcoin first came along and it was, say, $30, $50 per coin, and you were saying, no, that it'll crash, it's not real, it's not practical. Well, just think if you'd bought yourself a few hundred Bitcoin now, and now they're worth over $7,000 a piece.
Real quick, this is the thing about Bitcoin also, and to be more level-headed about it. When I first heard of Bitcoin, I heard of it in this sense: somebody spammed your computer, you got locked up. And the only way that you could unlock your computer would be to go to some website that some hijacker has hijacked your computer. You have to go to their website, buy Bitcoin, and pay them in Bitcoin.
No.
That was how I found out what Bitcoin was. It was a criminal enterprise.
No, that's nonsense. That everything you just said is total nonsense. But it
was true.
That's total nonsense.
Okay.
That has nothing to do with Bitcoin.
When they hijacked your computer, they insisted on getting paid in Bitcoin so that the money track could not be traced.
Well, of course, people are going to be insist to be paid in Bitcoin if they don't want their money to be traced. But that's a good thing about Bitcoin, is because I don't want my money to be traced.
Okay.
First, by the way, who's they and why are they tracing my money?
I don't know.
That's a whole other.
If you're out there hijacking people's computers and taking over corporations and shutting them down, and you're demanding to get paid in a non-traceable currency, you're probably a bad guy.
Did they send you the meme from Captain Phillips and say, "Look at me, I am the captain now"?
No,
when they hijack your computer, they didn't. Oh.
No.
Oh well. Okay. Well, anyway, the only reason I brought that up is that we're gonna do a Bitcoin episode in the future. But for anybody listening at home and anybody on the Facebook page, I'd love to bring somebody on who can be our Bitcoin expert to answer all of our questions and talk about the blockchain and talk about the difference between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and the recent failed SegWit split, which I know Blake right now is like, what in the world?
I've got no idea.
What in the world? No. But those are all. We can have a whole episode to talk about the things, but I really want to find somebody to bring on to talk about it. So if you know anybody, send us a mmessage. We'd love to talk to them.
Love to have you on the show.
So for today's episode, because we're not going to talk about Bitcoin.
Okay.
I wanted to touch a little bit on a few different topics about education, and then we're going to end our episode with a new segment. And we'll get to that when we get there, because I don't want to say it now because it'll just ruin the whole episode. Yeah, it's so exciting.
Just hold on.
So our first article for today, I'm getting it from Zero Hedge, is written by a gentleman named Joseph Jankowski from planetfreewill.com, and he's reporting from the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire, of course, that's the live free or die state. A lot of libertarian-minded people in New Hampshire, and they recently relaxed some regulations on homeschooling.
Okay.
And it says right here, New Hampshire lawmaker equates homeschooling to child abuse.
What?
Nanny state to be pushed on parents. And so he starts off the article with, in 2012, New Hampshire passed a measure that eased states' intervention into the operations of homeschooling families. They reduced the number of filings parents would have to submit in order to get state approval And so just all in all, they've made it easier for parents who were interested in homeschooling to take on that responsibility.
Right.
And I'm all for that. If you know me and you know my libertarian background, I want to close the Department of Education. Education, for one, it should be left up to the states, number one.
Yeah.
And so absolutely close the federal Department of Education. But I feel like public schools have been an abject failure. And that's another one of those things where it's such a big topic. We could have a whole episode just talking about education. Education in the United States. But I really want to focus in on the news coming out of New Hampshire. So it's Democratic lawmaker Marjorie Porter in New Hampshire. She's the one that equated child abuse and homeschooling as roughly the same thing. She made comments along the lines of, well, that half the kids are failing to learn, it's a floodgate to drop out, so on and so forth. Well, I'm not here to say that necessarily one person's homeschooling is going to be particularly good or bad. When you say homeschooling, you're talking about lots of different individual parents and families,
sure,
and
all
educating
different social
their
and
kids.
economic backgrounds.
Yes.
All sorts of things.
Yeah, and really, it's just drawing that line between public and private. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't even necessarily just say homeschooling. You can also kind of tie private schools into that as well. We've got a handful of private schools here in Murray County in Columbia, Tennessee, where we broadcast from. It just kind of goes to show you the mentality of people who work within the state, who, no matter what the results are, no matter how low the standards go, no matter how bad test scores are, they always feel like that we have to spend more money on education because that's always going to be the only answer. And the only way we can make this happen is for government to get involved. The only way we can educate the population and to have a curriculum that's balanced across the nation is to have government involved. Anybody who has seen the line graphs that show you the increase in spending on education over the decades, but you see the line of average test scores just basically as more or less a flat line. Yeah. It just goes to show you that at the very least, can't we ask the question that maybe our money is not going to good use? Right. You remember all that money that you pointed a gun at me and said that I have to give you in the form of taxes, and you're going to spend a percentage of that on education? If I know that if I were to spend more and more money on my food budget, then the more money I spent, the nicer restaurants I'd go to.
Exactly.
I would expect
and the bigger belt you'd have to buy.
And this is also true. I would fully expect that if I was going to spend $100 on a steak versus a $5 box from Taco Bell, there's going to be a difference in the quality of dinner that I'm going to receive.
Sure, not to hit on Taco Bell.
Not to hit on Taco Bell.
Like that,
But you just understand that there's a difference in price, and that's going to equate a difference in quality. But with government, you have a monopoly, and monopolies don't ever need to improve.
Right.
Because there's no alternative.
Exactly.
And what this all comes around to for me is that when you have more private operations opening and when you have more parents that are choosing to go the homeschool route to educate their kids privately, what that is that is a drawing back of the power away from the state monopoly back into the hands of parents.
Right.
And and I don't know much about this Marjorie Porter, but it for me, the biggest reason I wanted to discuss this article today, other than, the clickbaity, sort of headline and subject matter, is just the fact that it just shows you the psyche of people who believe that the state is the answer. It shows you the psyche of people who genuinely think that, homeschooling is going to destroy their education, but if they went to a public school, well, of course they're going to get a wonderful education.
Right.
I don't know about you, but I think public education in this country has been atrocious for some time, and it's gone from bad to worse.
Well, I mean, you think about it. There's a lot of reasons I think that not just that teachers are underpaid. The school day, the way that the hours are working for kids, They work against the average working adult. You know, my wife and I have had discussions about that. But also, economically speaking, I mean, you know, they're dumping all this money into the schools. Where's the money going? It's,
well,
you know,
I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna say this, and I know I'm gonna take some heat for this. I think most teachers are vastly overpaid.
You think they're overpaid?
I think a lot of them are, because I think there's a lot of really crummy teachers. But that's a systemic issue in the public sector. When you have a government monopoly on education.
That's not true everywhere.
No. Hear me out.
Okay.
Because that's exactly my point, is that when you come out against somebody's sacred cow or some group of people that are considered, you know, this appraised group, whether it be any type of public servant, whether it be cops, whether it be teachers, then if you make a criticism, boy, you're going to get heat, because how dare you say something negative to these wonderful people that are providing this? No. I went through the school system. There's a lot of crummy teachers.
Yeah.
And they should be gone. The problem is that
there's no performance-based system that's performance-based on pay,
well,
pay based on performance.
It's like it's not even a double whammy. It's like a triple or quadruple whammy, that it's hard for you to get rid of teachers because of things like tenure, because of teachers unions and things like that. But you also can't really blame teachers either, because they have no control over their classrooms anymore. There's so many bureaucrats in the education system that are sending down so many directives and so many plans, and that are micromanaging so much how the classroom is to be operated, what the curriculum entails.
It's like the teachers' hands are tied.
Exactly. The teachers, and it's not just the teachers, the administrators, the principals of the schools, their hands are tied. The principal has no say what goes on in his or her school anymore. Right. You know, someone from the school board or someone from the Department of Education is laying down the groundwork by which they have to operate. And that's what you get in the public education system. What you would get in a private school, if you and I were to open a school, and this is our school, and we're the headmasters or the principals of this school, and we're going to hire teachers and put together our curriculum and do things, then for one, absolutely, we would have to operate a good school where kids are getting a good education. Yeah. Because if we didn't, then the parents would take their kids out, and then we would have no customers, and then our school would go out of business.
Exactly.
In the same way any business would go out of business. And so we would answer to the marketplace, answer to our customers. But the other thing is that the multitude of benefits that you have in your own private area of learning is, if you have a student that can't be worked with and you expel them, they're expelled. They're gone. They're off the campus.
Right. They have to go find something elsewhere.
I'm not worried about what my attendance numbers look like because I expelled some kids.
Exactly.
And I'm not worried about meeting a certain test score criteria.
Right.
Because if anything, our standards are going to be through the roof higher what public education system is. But we're not going to tiptoe around problem areas. If we have a problem, we're going to address it, or changes are going to be made.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If I own a private institution of learning and I hire you as an instructor, what I'm saying to you is that if an enormous majority of your students are not coming out of that system with a great understanding of the subject matter, you're fired. You're fired in year one.
Yeah.
But you do what you want.
Right.
You run your classroom the way you see fit, and if you take on the challenge of running the classroom the way you want and you succeed, then you will be rewarded for that. You will get raises. If we're going to have anything such as tenure, the only people who are getting it are the ones who show year in and year out
that they've earned it.
That they've earned it, exactly. In the system the way it is now, once again, that's what you get with a monopoly.
Right.
If a monopoly has some control, and like with the state has control over education. The state says things are going to be done this way. You have to send your kids to us if they're not being homeschooled, or depending on where they are. You have to send your kids to us. We're going to get them for 13 years.
Yeah.
And then we're going to send them out in the world, and they're going to learn what we say, and they're going to show up when we say, and they're going to leave when we say. And they can hold that position because they don't answer to you. They don't. They don't answer to you, and don't come at with this nonsense of, oh, well, we can vote, we have our votes. Yeah, well, how's that been working for the last 100 years?
Yeah, I mean, what has the vote been doing?
Yeah, the vote's been
hiring
doing nothing.
bureaucrats up into the school board, and next thing you know, there's there's no improvement on at the student level.
Yes.
And so kids aren't getting any better.
And so what I strongly believe is that if the system is broken down, in my opinion, the way that it is, if the standards are so low, if the education is that poor, and yes, you do have crummy teachers that are getting paid too much. Yes, there are great teachers that I'd love to be paid more, but there's some crummy teachers that shouldn't be teaching at all, that don't belong in a classroom. If it's that bad and you and I have no control over how that education is being presented, then the only option, if there's no recourse, if I have no recourse to improve the public education system, then the next thing I can do is remove myself from it.
Sure.
Is get my kids out of it. Is to educate my kids myself and find somewhere else for them to go.
And homeschooling is a good option for that.
Yes, and homeschooling is a good
private
option.
School thing.
Yeah, exactly. And not everyone it has the means to be able to go to a nice private school. Although once again, I would also point out that if we weren't spending the kind of money we're spending on a crappy public education system, then there would be more money in people's pockets to spend on private education.
Schools, right.
But that being neither here nor there, it troubles me that I would like to think that any rational thinking person can see that the public education system is a wreck. I'd like to think that any rational thinking person can see that it's not where we want it to be and drastic changes need to be made.
Right.
What concerns me is that for those of us who see that and who think, you know what, I'd rather just opt out. I'd rather just go a different direction. It troubles me that there's a certain element in the population that are so threatened by people wanting to remove themselves from the equation that they say lines like this politician said, that they attack homeschooling, that they want more regulation on parents' choice in how to educate their children, and ultimately it comes down to the principled position of, is the state responsible for that child? Does the state make the decisions for that child, or do the parents make the decision for that child?
Right.
And if you're someone who believes that the parents make the decision for their children and they're responsible for their children and not the state, then you would be repulsed by comments like that.
Absolutely.
There is absolutely issues of child abuse. Quite frankly, I would go on record here saying that I would be much more concerned with the education and the environment my kids receiving in public schools to be abused much more than private schooling.
I can speak from the perspective of a parent that has had a child do homeschooling, and look, homeschooling's not easy. I mean, it requires a lot of discipline. It requires a lot of focus. I mean, at home you have so many distractions, and to call that child abuse is ignorant. Mm-hmm. These are people who don't really understand what it's like to actually on the ground floor to try to educate your child at home with all of the distractions and all the things about being home and how much harder that actually makes it. But it's to add taxing onto that and to add more regulation, it's already a very challenging thing to do. And I mean, when you have a parent that stays at home that is educating your children, okay, it's already hard enough, to get your kid to focus on what you're trying to get them to do, to have to think that you've got so much more regulations sitting for me. When we went through the workbooks, when we did the things with our son, that was not easy, man. And he was not, he did not have an easy time doing that.
Well, if there's a bright spot at all, it's that with technology, with the internet, and with what I see as more of a resurgence of homeschooling and private schooling, it's becoming easier.
And it's getting better.
Yeah, it's becoming easier and it's getting better.
Yeah.
And once again, it just comes back to that principle of choice. As long as there are options out there, and as long as you have the choice to make for you and yours, I just don't see how anyone can make the logical argument that restricting choice and taking the decision power out of private citizens' hands is the answer.
Yeah,
I can't imagine that's the answer. Yeah.
No.
But there are people that think that.
Yeah, and I mean, the public school system isn't working the way it should. We all know that. I'm not saying that homeschooling is a better option, okay, because it is for the disciplined. Okay, so when they're talking about it being child abuse, if you've got a parent that is absolutely incapable of educating their child, and they're not doing the things they're required to do in homeschooling, maybe that they're saying has a little bit of credence, but still, they're pushing it a little far. I mean, if I put my kid through homeschooling and I don't do anything and let them play video games all day and eat junk food and not interact with other kids, I'm not actually putting my kid through homeschooling at all. I'm just letting them stay home from school.
This is a perfect time to, because I want to say the phrase taxation is theft in every single episode of the Gold Standard.
Yeah.
But now's the perfect time to point out, since taxation is theft, that even if you have your kids being homeschooled, they're still taxing you.
I'm still paying for
You're
them
still
to go to
paying
school.
taxes for the public schools that you're not using.
So the funny thing is, should homeschooling be a free option supplied to you by the government? Then if it is, then homeschooling will suck.
Yes. Well, of course. So speaking of homeschooling getting better and easier all the time, I know one homeschool curriculum that I know of that I would endorse is the Ron Paul homeschool curriculum. Dr. Paul, after he left politics, he put together a homeschool curriculum because he's somebody who sees the value in having things available for parents to make it easier on them to provide that option, so they don't have to have a PhD in anything to be able to do that in their home. So this comes to us. I'm getting this from Zero Hedge, but it's coming straight from the horse's mouth. Ron Paul via his group, the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. He wants to see more tax breaks for education, and he wants to see a reduction in the role of the state in education. He starts off here by saying, shutting down the Department of Education and returning control of the education dollar to the American people is the key to improving education.
Agreed.
The best way to put the people in charge of education is by shutting down all unconstitutional bureaucracies, repealing the 16th Amendment, and ending the Federal Reserve's money monopoly. Since Congress is unlikely to restore constitutional limited government in the near future, supporters of quality education must advance policies aimed at giving Americans control over the education dollar so they can seek alternatives to the federally controlled system. This is why he's always supported education tax credits and deductions. So there you go, straight from the horse's mouth. We were just talking about that if you see the system and you see the bureaucracy and you see so much government entrenchment, and you know that you as an individual will not be able to change that system, and you don't really, and voting has gotten you nowhere because you just get more of the same, then instead of saying, well, we'll continue to enact change, and you're just kind of spinning your tires in the mud, then the next best option is to just remove yourself and your loved ones from the system. Take as much control on individually as you possibly can.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what Dr. Paul says. He continues further down here. Moving to a free market education system would increase the amount of money spent on educating children. This is because in a free market, resources would not be siphoned away from the classroom to support a bloated federal bureaucracy.
Right.
And schools would not be forced to waste valuable resources proving that they are complying with federal regulations.
Right.
So once again, we talked about earlier about how you see this upward trend that more and more money is being spent on average per student in the United States over the decades. More and more money is going into the Department of Education.
I don't think it's really getting to the student, but yeah.
But performance is staying the same. Exactly so that money just all that does is it allows for more bureaucrats to be hired who then have to constantly justify their job and to justify more money for more bureaucrats and more funding and more bureaucrats.
And who have unusually high salaries, might I add.
Yeah, they do. And what did I see recently? We're up to something like $11,000 or $12,000 is what is spent on the average student per year in the public education system. $12,000. I mean, it's just, and so once again, it seems insane.
That doesn't make any sense.
It seems crazy to imagine that untold amounts of millions is going into education to get the results we have. To get the results we have, it's hard to imagine that much money is being spent.
And you drive up to your local school board and you see Corvettes in the parking lot.
Yeah. It's and then it comes around to you that wait a minute, all things being equal, let's just say as a mental exercise, we continue to tax people at exactly where they are, and we continue to pull all that money in the Department of Education exactly the way they are.
Right.
But instead of then trickling that down, we shut down the public education system in its entirety, and you just simply write every single parent a check for every student you have. You get a check for every student. So if you have more kids, it's more than one. You get a $12,000 check for every student you have, and you are to use that money to educate them. So how many kids do you have in school right now?
3.
So that's $36,000. If
God.
I gave you, Blake, if I gave
my job,
if I gave you, well, no, that's for their education.
I have to spend it on their education. So now we're being regulated.
If I gave you a check for $36,000 and said, "Can you figure out a way to educate your children with this amount of money?" I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure.
I'm pretty sure I can come up with a way. Yeah,
you
that kind of dough. Yeah.
I mean, you think of. I mean, you want to talk about like open classrooms and technology and everything else. Each one of your kids would have the nicest. I mean, they'd have the nicest computer.
You realize that is 3 times the average cost of private school. 3 times.
Yep.
And that's for a really great private school. Okay. Yep. So thinking about that, there's got to be waste. Clearly there's waste. The question is, where is the waste going? Okay, and what can be done to stop it?
Yeah.
I don't know if you can vote that out. I'm not sure because, you've got guys coming in that are being voted in that are turning around and hiring people that they know to work under them from previous departments and giving them $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 salaries when they deserve a $30,000 salary.
Maybe it's a good thing we don't always get what we deserve.
Right.
We said that in a recent episode. Well, and Dr. Paul continues here, by increasing competition, education scholarship tax credits encourage government-run schools to improve. The threat of losing more students may even cause local school boards and state boards of education to resist federal mandates. Thus, education scholarship tax credits can improve the education of all children. Basically, what Dr. Paul's getting around to here is that I know that purist libertarians would say that tax credits and public scholarships are a form of subsidy, and then that's coming on the backs of taxpayers, and so that is inherently wrong. And I would agree with that as a pure statement. Yeah. But I think what Dr. Paul is getting at is that if you're using the current standard and the current system as our baseline, and you are you are spending this massive amount of money each year on education, then just simply wouldn't it be better then if we chopped that money up into scholarships for individual students and individual families to then turn around and be able to use on a private school or what have you, or to just use in their own home with homeschooling. What it boils down to is the big word there, is that it's more choice.
Yeah.
When you have more market solutions, when you have more options, when you have more choice, you're inherently breaking up the power of the state monopoly on education.
Absolutely.
And when you do that, even if you're someone who genuinely believes that there's a role for the state to play, even if you're someone who genuinely is a supporter of public schools and you want to see improvement there as opposed to just simply blowing it all up and starting over, even if that's your position, then in a position like this where with these suggestions where you do have more options, where you break up the monopoly, it would force the public school system to make changes. It would force them to do a better job because they want to keep students in their schools and not lose them to private schools, to not lose them to homeschooling. It would force them to make the kind of changes that we're complaining that we can't get with our votes and we have no control over. I think that if there were more serious alternatives that were more realistic for the average family, to the point that you saw very serious reductions in enrollment in public schools, all of a sudden you would see the state making these kinds of changes that we're discussing.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. And he concludes here in his article, almost all Americans agree that education should be generously funded. The only question is, who should control the education dollar, the federal government or the people, or by proxy, the parents of the children themselves. Anyone looking for the answer need only consider how American education has declined as the federal government's role has increased. Education scholarship tax credits are an important step towards restoring control of education to the American people and providing quality education to children from low-income families. Congress should help American children and include education scholarship tax credits in the tax reform bill. So, Dr. Paul, he was a congressman for a lot of years. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I would rather there just not be a state and no state involvement in education. Dr. Paul is not quite as hardline as me. He's more along the lines of, well, if we're gonna have state involved in education and we're gonna spend this money on education, let's at least put the spending power back in the hands of the people that's their tax money in the first place. Once again, as I always say, I would not sit here and say that I have the end-all be-all answers and fixes for the education system. I would go on record as saying that I am an opponent of the public education system. I would absolutely go on record as saying that I would close the Federal Department of Education, leave it up to the states. I'm not necessarily saying a state Department of Education would be better, but I absolutely would leave it up to the states as opposed to a Federal Department of Education. I guess what really is the eye-opening thing for all of us is how quickly it seems like some of these declines happened. Is that they didn't happen overnight, but they certainly happened quickly. Yeah. And there's a very sudden and violent shift in education, and I don't want to get into a big conversation about Common Core and some of the more recent.
Although I believe that Common Core is part of the problem, it's definitely not the root of it.
And of course, during George W. Bush's time, the No Child Left Behind and some of these different initiatives that. That's the funny thing about initiatives in government, that they always will have a name that sounds innocuous enough, that sounds lighthearted and beneficial, but it never works out in practice. And so once again, I just don't see the argument for the state in education when you see the results that it has wrought. And then always from the libertarian perspective, we're always going to fall back on the principled position that I always want the parents to be making those decisions and not the state. Because who is responsible for your child? Right. Is it you or is it Uncle Sam?
Right.
And I don't want to open the floodgates of what the answer is if the answer is Uncle Sam.
Yeah. We're glad he isn't.
Yeah, we're glad he isn't. That is absolutely for sure. Well, Blake, I think it's about that time.
About that time?
It's about that time. It's about that time. We're introducing a new segment. A new segment that we're hopefully going to be doing each week now. It's our meme of the week.
Meme of the week. It's up. Look at that.
You can't fight.
Wow.
You can't.
Okay, I can't fight. I'm so excited. Okay.
Well, I've read all over recently that you've heard if you can't beat them, join them, and it takes one to know one, and all these cliches. Is that if you can't persuade them with a well thought out and academically published article, then just hit them with a meme.
Yeah, just hit them with a meme.
So our meme it's a 4-column comic. You see the bloated monster there that's labeled big government, and the politician says, "It's time for big government to go. You go on and get." And he says, "Now let me introduce you to my pride and joy. Go on, little guy, say hi." And it's the small government. And what's he say?
I'm hungry.
I'm hungry. And somebody actually had this little part, is that this is why I believe minarchist society can only ever be a stepping stone to a purely anarchistic or voluntarist society. A small government, no matter how well-intentioned, will always end up back at the systems we know now. I think we might have actually touched on that a few weeks ago or a couple of weeks ago, in the sense that where I had said I am 100% and anarcho-capitalist.
Right.
And describing, why that term is and kind of staying away from the term anarchy. Because
I do like the voluntarist or whatever that was.
Voluntarist is voluntarist or voluntarism is a popular term.
Is similar to what you're talking,
exactly. And it's based and it's still coming along the same line.
Basically the same thing. It just sounds less threatening.
Well, the term and I have no problem using the term anarchy because I know what it means.
Right.
It just means operating without the state
Not
control.
the guys running around in the black outfits with the red X on their shirt. No, that's different.
Because
terrorism.
Well, because when a libertarian says that I'm an anarcho-capitalist and I don't believe in state control and I want to get the state out of our lives, that doesn't mean that then we go burn down Starbucks and we're flipping over the dumpsters and we're throwing rocks through the windows. No, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because we want to live in a civil society.
Right.
It's just simply saying that we don't believe that that's the answer. We don't believe that that
everything
big government
should be regulated.
Yeah, we don't believe that big government is the way we will have our civil society.
Right.
We don't believe that free people can live with a government that big.
Right.
And so going, to our meme of the week and something we had discussed in a previous episode, I believe it's the author Robert Higgs that had written something along the lines of you hear a lot of people talk about the Constitution, and I used to. I'll admit, I come from a background that at one time I was a strict constitutionalist, limited government conservative type, and I don't claim to be anymore. And it's not that I want to pick a fight with strict constitutionalists, because I'm very much more a proponent of a originalist interpretation of the Constitution and staying to the advice of the founding generation. I'm very much more inclined to support that than I am what we have today.
Exactly.
But I guess it's just more from the libertarian, the philosophical standpoint that the Constitution can only be one of two things. It can either have been intended to be reinterpreted as time goes by, and it must have been intended to allow us to bloat to this overarching monolithic federal government that has control of everything. It either intended to do that, and in that case it was a monstrous document that should have never been ratified, or it didn't intend to do that, and it's been subverted. And in that case, it's still a failure because obviously it did not do what it meant to do. It did not restrict government. And
so which one do you think you fall for, the pro or the first or the second?
Well, I mean,
the
point being is that either way, it's the same thing. It's a failure.
Okay.
Either way, it's a failure. Either
I would rather accept the latter as the failure than
than the former.
Than the former.
If you're someone who believes in a strict interpretation of the Constitution, then like I said, that's all well and good, and I want to find ideological allies where I can find them, because I see, where we can stand with liberty together, I'll stand with you. However, it obviously didn't work. It obviously didn't work. I mean, look. I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution about as the founders wrote it about a federal Department of Education, as we were just as we were just talking about.
Right. In fact, it would have been more of a state thing and not a federal thing. Yeah.
Well, it's
if there had to be that at all.
Yeah, I believe it's the 10th Amendment that says that, the powers that are not expressly delegated to the federal government is assumed to be left to the states or the people respectively.
Yeah.
God, I hope that's right, because now someone's typing. No,
that's inaccurate.
I know. No. What's the meaning? It's actually. I think I'm right on that though. I'm sure somebody will let me know if I'm not. But once again, the point being is that if you're a I use myself as an example that I've considered myself a libertarian for a long time, even when I didn't necessarily know a ton about libertarian philosophy and had not read as many books and listened to as many people. But I just knew that I was someone that believed in the individual and not the collective. I was somebody who believed that big bloated government was a bad thing. I believed that taxation was wrong and that it was theft. I mean, once you go down that road, you're a libertarian.
Yeah.
But as my thinking has evolved, even when I considered myself a libertarian, I still was somebody that thought that, well, gosh, if we could just get some Supreme Court justices, and if we could just elect enough representatives that have an originalist interpretation of the Constitution, if we could just obey the law as written, then by golly, we wouldn't have these problems that we're having. But as time goes by, we clearly see that's just not realistic. That's not realistic, or that's just flat out not true. And I'm saying that to older version of me. I'm saying that to myself, that that's just not true. It didn't work. And so if the only way, then your only recourse, as we just discussed in the education issue, your only recourse is to try to exit the system as much as you possibly can, to take as much individual control as you possibly can, to leave as much of the money and the decision-making power in your own hands as you possibly can. That's the only answer, because I can't change the system.
Yeah.
I can't. I only have one vote, and most people don't vote.
Exactly.
So
that's on a whole nother issue.
Yeah, and I don't even blame people for that, because the system is just so convoluted and so corrupt that I totally understand why people just throw up their arms and say,
lose faith in it.
Yeah, they lose faith in it. Well, but like I said, the Constitution, it's a big pill to swallow, but the Constitution has failed. There's no other way to interpret it. You can.
I agree with you to a certain extent. It failed in the sense of what you're saying, but it hasn't failed overall. It's led to where we are, and that could be seen as a fail. But hey, look, man, we're better off than most people.
Oh, we're better off than most. We're better off than
better off than a lot of nations in this world. So
we're better off than most.
We could be better.
Yeah.
But
we're better off than most people, but I'd still call that a red herring. That I'm not worried about most people. What I'm concerned with is I'm concerned with personal freedom and liberty. Yeah. That's where my concern is I want people to be free.
And honestly, more now than ever, I feel that the attacks on your personal freedom and liberty are really coming from all sides, man. With media, let's face it, the media is really good at telling you the way they want you to look at things. And if you're just kind of sitting there and you're not really one of those kind of people that thinks too deeply about your own compassions, you're likely to be swayed by them. And, you want to be real careful out there, not to take everybody else's opinion to heart. Maybe form one of your own. That's what we're here for.
Speaking of media telling you what to think, this is something I'd like to conclude with today, because I just know that this is one of those things where it's just going to be a rabble rousing kind of a conversation.
You caught that segue was a good one. Yeah. See, we're getting better at our segues now.
Yes. Now,
look at that.
I'm not even going to. I'm not even going to give these people the benefit of advertising their site or their position. Wow. But you can find this. It's copyright Vanessa Otero 2017. You can tweet her at @VLotero. I'm getting this from the website allgeneralizationsareFalse.com. This is I'd seen this before. There's actually
I disagree with that.
We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. There's actually a and I lost it. I lost it forever. There is a group that, and this is actually their third edition, I believe, of this. There's a group that evaluates all media, lots of major media publications, news sites, television productions, and they rate them on a scale of liberal to conservative.
Okay.
And then also on the scale of whether or not it's garbage, fake news, misinterpreting facts, that sort of thing, all the way up to this is a solid, well-sourced story, and so on and so forth. And so if you kind of see as I'm scrolling through here, the bottom of this chart is your fake news.
Your nonsense.
Yeah.
And according to this chart, your nonsense.
And the top of the chart is the genuine, well-reported and sourced news.
Also nonsense.
And everything in the middle, we're going to get there. Would you calm down for just a second?
I'm just excited. This is exciting.
And then of course, and then the left, the right is of course in the middle is it's mainstream and minimal partisan bias, and then as it skews further right or left, it skews right or left, but it's still reputable, all the way to hyper partisan conservative or hyper partisan liberal with that where they expressly are promoting their own personal perspective.
Sure.
And then on the far left and far right is liberal utter garbage / conspiracy theories and conservative utter garbage / conspiracy theories.
Nice.
Now, the first thing I would say before we even get into this is we talked about this in a prior episode, and that might be our meme of the week for next week.
Okay.
Is that don't just think of it about left and right. There's also north and south.
Yeah, there is.
North being authoritarian / state, and
Yep.
south being libertarian
Right.
/ personal liberty and freedom.
Exactly.
So I usually tend to shy a little bit away from things that just discuss nothing but left and right because there's more to it than that.
Right.
I know a lot of people on the right who think they need the government for X, Y, and Z, and a lot of people on the left who think they need government for A, B, and C. And from my perspective, you're both wrong because we don't need government. But anyway, so let's start at the bottom and we'll work our way up to because for me the top is more interesting than the bottom. So
Okay.
this is according to this focus group and this lady and their chart that they've put together. So starting at the bottom, the red rectangle is nonsense. It's damaging to public discourse. So if you want to find something that's
Read the Inquirer.
National Enquirer.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
Well, and what's look, I it's not that I argue where some of these exist.
Right.
I understand that Occupy Democrats is going to be a far left liberal.
Yes, and it's fairly clear.
And I understand that Fox News or the Conservative Tribune is going to be on the far right. Look, I
don't
get
think
that.
That's fair. Fox News is not that bad.
Yes,
it
it
is.
is.
Oh, come on.
Yes, before we're done with this show, I'm going to get you to understand that because I go after everybody's sacred cows.
I know.
If you because but the reason I say that though is because that's the mentality a lot of people have is that all that stuff's fake. But mine is good. It's just all that other people's stuff that's bad. No.
Wow.
No. They're all bad. So you start off at the bottom. You've got Occupy Democrats. You've got Forward Progressives, and then over here in the middle you have National Enquirer. I do think it's funny that at least National Enquirer is not partisan biased.
I know.
It's just ridiculous all the way around. Yeah.
It's just entertainment. Okay, that's good.
I also want to point out that Alex Jones over there at InfoWars is the far bottom right.
Wow.
The farthest right and the furthest bottom you can possibly be is InfoWars. And I don't disagree with that. The man's insane. But a couple of interesting ones I will point out real quick. You do have Breitbart on there, and Breitbart I will agree it can definitely be hit or miss, and I definitely think that since the Trump candidacy came along. Before Trump, Breitbart was a little bit more even keeled.
Yeah.
After Trump came along, they became Trump pumpers, as I like to call them. And so I understand why they're on the right side for sure. I wouldn't necessarily say they should be all the way on the bottom. But at least I get that I'm not a huge fan.
Okay.
At least I get it.
I can buy it.
Now I will, and now just for the sake of remembering, because we'll come back. Just remember that Fox News is down here in this section.
Now I see, and that's where I say that's taking things a little hard.
Now hold on, no. I love that Fox News is down here in the nonsense section.
Okay.
But we'll come.
Tell me why.
No. We'll come back. We got to look at the whole thing first.
Let's look at the whole thing.
Because it's not just where people are; it's where some people aren't.
Okay.
So I understand that most of what Fox News is partisan propaganda. Okay. I would absolutely argue that it's and I can understand it not exactly being high on your scale of reputable journalism.
Okay.
But there's others who are not in that section that should be. We'll come back.
Yeah, that's the more interesting part.
So then you get to the orange rectangle, which is these are people who are better. It's not total nonsense,
right,
but it's
kinda nonsense.
It's unfair interpretations of the news. So these are the people who are reporting a genuine news story, but they're putting their bias 100% in it. They're putting their bias 100% in it.
Sure.
So on the left side, you have BuzzFeed News. Who the heck gets their news from BuzzFeed?
I don't.
Come on, people. At least
BuzzFeed.
have at least enough self-respect to not get your news from BuzzFeed.
Yeah, that's like going back to the whole GQ thing. I get my news from GQ.
Yeah, I don't think they were a big enough of a periodical to even be on this list, but yeah, GQ would be down there. So on the left side you've got Alternet, Daily Cause, BuzzFeed News, New Republic, and Huffington Post. So Huffington Post is down here.
They're pretty left, I think, right?
Well, yeah, this is left. So they're
belong that high on the list, man.
they're definitely left, and they are in the section of unfair.
Yes.
Of course, once again, I'd put them all the way at the bottom.
Me too.
But at the very least, they do recognize that they're a bit out there.
Yes.
At least they're a bit out there by this scale. And then on the right side, you've got the New York Post, you got Daily Mail, you got the Federalist. Now, but one I will point out that I do find is interesting. We talked about this earlier. The Drudge Report. The Drudge Report is pretty far right, and it's down here on unfair interpretations of the news. Now, I'm not saying that Matt Drudge and the Drudge Report as a whole doesn't necessarily have their own agenda. Who doesn't?
Sure.
Everybody, and we would never on this show say that I don't have my personal opinions that I share on this show.
You do.
That is what the show is for. But I will say that the Drudge Report, for the most part, is a news aggregator.
Yeah.
I mean, by and large, it's just a collection of stories. Now, you could argue that they're only collecting stories that fit a certain agenda.
Sure.
But still, when you click on a leak, that's a USA Today article,
Yes.
or that may be an article.
They don't create the stories you listen to. They merely just collect them and push them to you.
It's just an aggregator. So once again, I guess I understand why it is where it is, but I would say it would be different if they had their own in-house journalists writing the articles themselves and they were severely bent.
Exactly.
That would be one thing.
Yeah.
But let's move on. So let's get to the yellow triangle, the yellow rectangle.
The yellow rectangle.
These are ones who are considered fair interpretations of the news.
Somebody's being nice.
So these are fair interpretations of the news. They're not necessarily the best, but they are considered fair.
But look where they put MSNBC, man. That should be down in that bottom right-hand corner, right opposite Fox News.
Hold on. Cut your mic. Can I get the producer to cut this guy's mic? So hold on a second. So once again, for me, it's a combination of some being somewhere that I don't necessarily understand why they're there, and other ones not being somewhere that they belong. It's kind of a double-edged sword. So in the fair section on the left side, and also if you'll notice too that they're skewing closer and closer to the middle, supposedly.
Right.
According to this, MSNBC, Mother Jones. I don't know if you've ever read much of Mother Jones.
Never even heard of Mother Jones.
Slate magazine. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
These in the New Yorker.
Yeah.
These in Vox. Oh my gosh, Vox is on there next to Slate. In my opinion, these are far, far left progressive.
They are
Organizations.
Yeah, I mean, there's no
and according to them, they are left, but they're not as heavily. They're on, if you notice, they're on the line between hyper partisan and just kind of skews liberal. We'll come back to that. Hold on. Okay. On the far right, you have National Review, Weekly Standard, Reason.com, Reason Magazine's is on the right side, and you have the Examiner, Washington Times, American Conservative.
But isn't it funny that in that particular category, it's heavily weighted to one side rather than the other?
A thing I'd like to point out on here is that I go to Reason. I enjoy some of the pieces that come out of Reason. Okay. I think that's where John Stossel is now. John Stossel went to work for Reason.
Okay.
Because I saw an interview from him recently where he was on the Rubin Report with Dave Rubin talking about it. I guess by their kooky logic, I understand why Reason's that far on the right.
Yeah.
And I understand why it would be fair. But I will say that some of the people who are all the way, and we'll get to that in a second, I'll just say that I think Reason could stand to be a little bit higher up for all the other ones that could stand to be a lot further down.
Yeah.
And I would definitely say that several of those that are over there on the left side should be represented much farther left than they're currently being represented, and much further down. and it goes both ways. I mean, look, the New York Post is definitely biased. The Daily Mail can be. I mean, everybody's got bias. It's not a matter of people don't have biases and agendas. Of course they do. Everyone does.
Yeah.
It's just the point that some people can do it in a more objective way than others, and I feel like reason's usually fairly objective. Now the elephant in the room in this section, you'll notice CNN.
Yeah, it's right in there.
Now CNN, of course, I mean MSNBC is there too, but CNN, of course, this is one of our major cable news networks.
Yeah,
24-hour news. This is one of our major networks and one of our first major networks to appear on this list at all. And if you'll notice, they moved them down to where they're kind of floating the line between fair and unfair.
Yep.
So I'll give them credit for this. The people who made this list, I'll at least give them credit for this. They at least recognize that CNN's not quite on the same level as some of the other major networks. They at least will give you that. They'll at least give us that.
I think they need to put a boat anchor on that bad boy and sink it down.
Yeah, but I would absolutely put CNN on the far bottom red.
Exactly. Especially lately. I mean, if you've watched CNN lately, things have gotten really rough over there. You know, I mean, it's. I don't know. I have to admit, I've become more of your Fox. Unfortunately, Fox person. I'm having fun switching over here. There we go. Now you see us. And when you're switching between Fox News and CNN, the same story is spun so far to one side or so far to the other, you can't get an even keel. You have to listen to one and listen to the other and then try to decide, okay, where's the middle ground here? You know, and having been in media, having worked in television, having worked for a Fox affiliate news station, I can tell you, back in the day, the whole point, the whole focus, all of the responsibility of being a responsible journalist is not putting your personal spin on it. And somehow over the last 15 or 20 years, it's just not interesting unless you've got your spin on it. And what that's done is it has unfortunately skewed the news and skewed what is really happening to a reporter's or a certain convention or the other, either you're Republican or you're Democrat or you're somewhere in the middle. You know, we need to get news back to being honest, truthful. This is what happened, not my interpretation of it. You know, and unfortunately, for some reason, these large news organizations have felt that they have to put these spins on things in order to make them interesting. Yeah, I disagree with that.
Well, let's look at the green rectangle. So just so we can finish this graphic, and I'm going to put it away. So who made it? Who made it to what they consider to be
the most fair and balanced
news? I mean, just straight up, this is news. It's not up for interpretation. Right. It's just the news as you just described, news as it was.
Right.
They have AP and Reuters, the major public network, NBC, ABC, CBS. Right. They have NPR, BBC, PBS, USA Today.
What we consider the old timers.
Al Jazeera. Yeah. Time Magazine.
Al Jazeera? Wait, what?
Al Jazeera.
What? Dead in the center down there?
The Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, Washington Post, New York Times.
This is
so. I guess what I would say about
nothing is free of opinion.
I guess what I would say about some of the ones that they have in the green rectangle is. You know, some as you already pointed, a lot of those are some of the old guard.
Yeah.
Some of the older, well-established news organizations. There's a few on there that are a little bit of head scratcher to me. The fact, of
definitely Al Jazeera.
Well, Al Jazeera. I mean, everybody can be hitter. I mean, I like Al Jazeera more than I like NBC, CBS, CNN.
Interesting.
I will, point out a couple of head scratchers for me. You have NPR and you have PBS. NPR and PBS are both paid for in part by government funding.
Right.
I hesitate. I hesitate with anything that is partially or completely sponsored by the state because that just reeks of bias right off the jump.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, also, we in our last episode we had that op-ed that was in the New York Times about can my children be friends with white people? They have the New York Times in the upper echelon of news.
Yeah.
And with minimal to no bias. They're right there on the line between skews liberal but still reputable or minimal partisan bias. They're mainstream news. I know I've seen a lot of trash in the New York Times.
Definitely.
I've seen garbage in the New York Times.
Definitely.
I've seen garbage in Time Magazine. I've heard garbage on the nightly major news, NBC, ABC, CBS.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of the same warmongering nonsense in the major news.
Exactly.
I've heard it on NPR and PBS. I guess the point being is I know nobody's perfect,
Right.
And I know that it's kind of like if you're ranking your favorite all time guitar players or bands or your favorite sports teams or whatever. That's so subjective,
It is.
and you could debate that it's hard to do. So I understand that something like this is hard to do. I guess where we kind of stand on it is this as a general rule of thumb, you would just basically see everybody at the bottom. there would just be there wouldn't even be a green rectangle.
Yeah,
there would just the green rectangle would just say decide for yourself.
Or it would be the ideal everyone is trying to reach up to, you know. Well,
the green rectangle would be empty, and the yellow rectangle would just be a message from the editor that says you figure that out for yourself, and then everybody would be orange and red. Everybody would be orange and red.
But going back to it, it all comes down to the same thing when it comes to news. You know, they've got to put a spin on it to make it exciting. They have to put a spin on it to make it interesting, and unfortunately, that takes away from the integrity of the news itself.
Well, what I challenge people to do is, well, for one, and we do, and I do this, and I do this for the show that I do here, is that I try to get my news from multiple sources, and anybody who thinks that I'm being too cynical. You know, I would challenge you the next time there's a major news story in the cycle is to listen to the full coverage of that story start to finish for like an hour on CNN, and then go get that same news cycle for an hour on Fox, and then go get that same news cycle for an hour on MSNBC, and listen to just how different it can be.
Right.
How
it's like the point of views are completely different.
And I agree with you that we are in a time where there is a frighteningly small amount of genuine journalists that they feel that their job is to collect as much information as possible and put it into an easy to digest format, and then you just figure it out for yourself. You just decide what you think about that.
We just need more of that.
We need more of that.
You know, we miss that.
Yeah, CNN. Ugh. Yeah.
Oh well.
Oh well. Yeah, I think that's probably going to about do us for today because we could talk forever about all these different news sources. But what I will say is that if you find what we have to say to be interesting at all, and you want to support what we're doing, you can join the conversation and join us at our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley. And if you think we're doing a good job and you're not tired of hearing from us yet, you can support our show on our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/TGS Alan Mosley. TGS Alan Mosley being the gold standard with Alan Mosley, but that's way too long to write. So anyway, you got any other?
No, sir. I think
thoughts?
that's a good one.
You think that's a good one?
Yes, absolutely. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, the gold standard with Alan Mosley. We'll see you next time.
Join us.